The grand ballroom of the Belmont estate in Newport, Rhode Island sparkled under crystal chandeliers on a warm September evening in 2017. The annual charity gala hosted by the prestigious Vandermeer Foundation was in full swing, with nearly 300 guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos mingling beneath vaulted ceilings adorned with classical frescoes. The event had become one of the most exclusive fundraisers on the East Coast social calendar, attracting wealthy philanthropists, business executives, and cultural elite from across the country. Everyone who mattered in high society had paid $5,000 per plate to attend, and they expected an evening of exceptional entertainment to match the exorbitant ticket price. The centerpiece of this year's gala was supposed to be a piano performance by Victoria Ashworth, a celebrated concert pianist who had recently returned from a European tour to critical acclaim. Victoria was exactly the kind of performer the Vandermeer Foundation favored, pedigreed, polished, and perfect for their sophisticated audience. She had trained at the Royal Academy of Music in London, performed at prestigious venues worldwide, and carried herself with the aristocratic bearing that made wealthy donors feel they were experiencing true culture. But at 6 o'clock that evening, just 2 hours before the scheduled performance, disaster struck. Victoria's manager called the foundation's event coordinator with devastating news. Victoria had been in a minor car accident on her way from New York City. She wasn't seriously injured, just some bruising and whiplash, but her doctor had absolutely forbidden her to perform. The stress and physical demands of playing a concert program were simply too much given her condition. Catherine Vandermeer, the foundation's 72-year-old director and widow of the industrialist whose fortune funded the organization, received the news with barely contained fury. She stood in her private office adjacent to the ballroom, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Catherine had built her reputation on hosting flawless events, and the thought of disappointing 300 influential guests was unacceptable. "Find me a replacement," she commanded her assistant Margaret Chen, who stood nervously by the door. "I don't care who it is or what it costs. We cannot have a gala without a piano performance. It's printed in the program. People are expecting it." Margaret, a competent woman in her 40s who had worked for the foundation for 12 years, immediately began making calls. She contacted booking agents, reached out to music schools, and even called personal contacts in the classical music world. But it was Saturday evening, and every pianist of suitable caliber was either already performing elsewhere, unavailable on such short notice, or simply unreachable. As 7:30 approached and guests began arriving at the estate, Catherine's anxiety transformed into barely suppressed panic. She moved through the reception area greeting donors with her practiced smile, but Margaret could see the tension in her employer's shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she accepted champagne glasses from passing waiters. Among the staff working the event that evening was Alina Rodriguez, a 53-year-old woman who had been employed as a housekeeper at the Belmont estate for 7 years. Alina was responsible for maintaining the private residence sections of the mansion, and she typically stayed well away from the grand events held in the public spaces. But tonight, with the gala requiring extra staff, she had been asked to help with coat check and other auxiliary duties. Alina was a quiet, unassuming woman with kind eyes and graying hair she wore pulled back in a simple bun. She moved through the elegant spaces in her plain black uniform, collecting empty glasses and ensuring the powder rooms remained pristine. To the guests swirling around her in their finery, she was essentially invisible, just another member of the service staff whose name they would never learn and whose face they would never remember. What none of them knew was that Alina Rodriguez had a history that would have astonished them. Born in Manila in the Philippines, Alina had been a piano prodigy as a child. She had performed her first public recital at age 7, playing Mozart with a maturity and technical precision that left audiences stunned. By her teenage years, she was winning competitions throughout Southeast Asia and had earned a full scholarship to study at the prestigious San Francisco Conservatory of Music. Alina had arrived in America at 18, filled with dreams of a concert career. She studied under renowned teachers, performed in recitals and competitions, and seemed destined for success. But at 23, just as her career was beginning to take off, her mother back in Manila fell seriously ill with cancer. Alina was the oldest of 5 children, and her family desperately needed financial support for medical bills and living expenses while her mother underwent treatment. The life of a young classical pianist, even a talented one, provided almost no income. Alina performed when she could, taught a few piano students, and took odd jobs, but it wasn't enough. As her mother's condition worsened and the bills mounted, Alina made the painful decision that countless immigrants before her had made. She set aside her dreams and found work that paid actual wages. She started as a hotel housekeeper, then worked her way into private home service, eventually landing the position at the Belmont estate. The job paid well by service industry standards and provided health insurance, which Alina needed as she began supporting not just her mother, but also her younger siblings' education. Over the years, as her mother recovered and her siblings graduated and found their own paths, Alina simply stayed. The work was steady, the Vandermeers were reasonable employers, and she had created a quiet, stable life. But Alina had not touched a piano in nearly 30 years. The instrument that had once been the center of her existence now represented a pain too deep to revisit. She had made her choice, sacrificed her gift for her family's survival, and built walls around that part of herself to make the loss bearable. On this particular evening, as Alina worked efficiently through her duties, she noticed the unusual tension among the senior staff. She overheard Margaret making increasingly desperate phone calls, and she saw Catherine's carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. During a brief moment in the service hallway, Alina encountered James, the estate's head butler who had always been kind to her. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. "Everyone seems upset." James glanced around to make sure they were alone, then lowered his voice. "The pianist cancelled, car accident. Mrs. Vandermeer is beside herself. Margaret's been trying to find a replacement for hours, but there's no one available on such short notice. The performance is supposed to start in 45 minutes. Alina felt an unexpected flutter in her chest, a ghost of something long buried stirring to life. She pushed it down immediately. That part of her life was over. She was a housekeeper now, nothing more. But as she returned to the ballroom to collect more glasses, she couldn't help moving closer to the magnificent Steinway concert grand that sat on the raised platform at the far end of the room. The instrument gleamed under carefully positioned lights, its black lacquer surface reflecting the chandelier crystals above. Alina found herself drawn to it despite her better judgment, remembering the feel of keys beneath her fingers, the way music had once poured out of her like a living thing. She was standing perhaps 10 feet from the piano, lost in memory, when she heard voices approaching. Catherine Vandermeer was speaking with sharp irritation to Margaret and two board members, a silver-haired man named Robert Hastings and an elegant woman in her 60s named Patricia Thornton. "We'll have to make an announcement," Catherine said bitterly. "Apologize for the cancellation, offer some excuse, and hope people don't demand refunds. It's humiliating, but there's no alternative now." "Perhaps we could play recorded music," Margaret suggested tentatively. "Recorded music," Catherine's voice dripped with disdain. "At a $5,000 per plate gala, we might as well serve them frozen dinners and plastic wine." Alina knew she should move away, return to her duties, and remain invisible as she always did. But something in Catherine's voice, the genuine distress beneath the aristocratic anger, made her hesitate. And in that moment of hesitation, Patricia Thornton noticed her standing near the piano. "Can we help you with something?" Patricia asked, her tone making it clear that the staff should not be lingering in the guest areas. Alina felt her face flush with embarrassment. "No, ma'am, I apologize, I was just collecting glasses." But as she turned to leave, Catherine's sharp eyes fell on her, and something in the older woman's desperate state made her speak without thinking. "You were standing very close to the piano. Do you play?" The question hung in the air. Alina could have said no. She could have excused herself and disappeared back into the comfortable invisibility of service work. But 3 decades of silence suddenly felt unbearably heavy, and before she could stop herself, the truth emerged. "I used to," Alina said quietly. "A long time ago." Catherine Vandermeer's eyes narrowed with interest, though her expression remained skeptical. She looked Alina up and down, taking in the simple housekeeping uniform, the worn hands, the humble demeanor of a woman who had spent years in service work. The idea that this middle-aged maid might be the solution to her crisis seemed almost absurd, yet Catherine was desperate enough to grasp at any possibility. "What do you mean you used to play?" Catherine asked. "Piano lessons as a child, church performances." Alina hesitated, aware that the other staff members were now watching this exchange with surprise. She rarely spoke about her past, had trained herself over the years to keep her history private. But something about this moment, standing so close to that magnificent instrument, made the walls she had built around her former life feel suddenly permeable. "I studied at the San Francisco Conservatory," Alina said simply. "I performed professionally for a few years before I came to work here." The silence that followed was profound. Margaret's mouth fell open slightly. Robert Hastings and Patricia Thornton exchanged glances that mixed disbelief with condescension. Catherine stared at Alina as though seeing her for the first time, trying to reconcile this information with the woman who had cleaned her bathrooms and changed her linens for 7 years. "You're telling me," Patricia said slowly, her tone dripping with doubt, "that you attended one of the premier music conservatories in the country and now you work as a housekeeper?" Alina met her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am." Family circumstances required me to change careers. It was a long time ago. Robert Hastings laughed, a sharp bark of amusement that carried an edge of cruelty. Well, that's quite a fall from grace, isn't it? From concert halls to cleaning toilets. What happened? Not talented enough to make it in the real world of music. Alina felt the words like a slap, but she kept her expression neutral. She had endured years of being invisible, of being dismissed and underestimated. One more insult from a wealthy man who knew nothing about sacrifice would not break her. Catherine, however, was less interested in the social implications and more focused on solving her immediate problem. Can you still play? Could you perform tonight? I haven't touched a piano in almost 30 years, Alina admitted. I don't know if I could. 30 years? Patricia scoffed. Catherine, this is ridiculous. We can't put a housekeeper on stage in front of our donors. Even if she could play once, which I sincerely doubt, she would be hopelessly out of practice. It would be embarrassing for everyone. Margaret, who had always been kind to Alina, spoke up tentatively. Mrs. Vandermeer, perhaps we should at least let her try. We have 40 minutes before the scheduled performance. If Alina could play even one or two pieces adequately, it might be better than canceling entirely. Robert shook his head dismissively. This is absurd. I vote we make the announcement and apologize. At least that preserves our dignity rather than trotting out the help to fumble through some amateur performance. Catherine's jaw tightened. She was a woman accustomed to making difficult decisions, and her reputation for producing flawless events was on the line. She studied Alina for a long moment, weighing the risk of public humiliation against the certainty of disappointment if she canceled. Play something for me now, Catherine commanded. Just you and me and these few people. If you can play competently, I'll consider it. If you can't, we'll proceed with the cancellation announcement. Alina felt her heart racing. She looked at the piano, that beautiful instrument that represented everything she had loved and lost. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself from the pain of confronting what she had given up. But another part, the part that had never truly died despite 3 decades of silence, yearned to touch those keys again. All right, she said quietly. She walked to the piano with legs that felt unsteady, aware of the skeptical eyes following her every movement. She could hear Patricia whispering to Robert, their voices low but the contempt clear. They expected her to fail, to prove that she was nothing more than a housekeeper with delusions about her past. Alina sat at the bench and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers looked wrong against the pristine ivory and ebony, roughened by years of scrubbing floors and washing dishes. These were not the hands of a concert pianist anymore. These were working hands, scarred and calloused. She closed her eyes and let muscle memory guide her. Without conscious thought, she began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first movement. It was a piece she had learned as a teenager in Manila, one she had performed countless times in her youth. The opening notes emerged tentatively, her fingers stiff and uncertain after so many years away from the keyboard. She stumbled over a passage, her left hand not quite coordinating with her right. She heard Patricia's knowing sigh, confirmation of her low expectations. But as Alina continued, something remarkable began to happen. Her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The music that had lived inside her for 5 decades, silent but never truly gone, began to flow through her fingers. The stiffness faded. The coordination returned. And with it came a flood of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. Alina poured everything into those notes, every sacrifice she had made, every dream she had surrendered, every moment of grief for the life she might have lived. The music became a vessel for 3 decades of unexpressed longing, and it rang through the empty ballroom with haunting beauty. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find Catherine staring at her with undisguised astonishment. Margaret had tears running down her cheeks. Even Robert and Patricia looked shaken, their expressions of smug superiority replaced by genuine surprise. Catherine recovered first, her business mind already calculating possibilities. That was extraordinary. Can you play for an hour? Do you know enough pieces? Alina's mind raced through her old repertoire. I know many pieces by memory. Chopin, Debussy, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, but Mrs. Vandermeer, I'm not dressed appropriately. I can't perform in a housekeeping uniform. We'll find you something to wear, Catherine said decisively. She turned to Margaret. Take Alina to my private quarters. Find something suitable from my wardrobe. She's roughly my size from 20 years ago. There should be evening gowns that fit. Get her cleaned up, hair and makeup too. Patricia stepped forward, her voice sharp with objection. Catherine, you cannot be serious about this. Regardless of how she plays, she's a housekeeper. Our donors paid $5,000 expecting a world-class performer with proper credentials. What will people think when they discover we've put the maid on stage? They'll think we secured excellent entertainment despite difficult circumstances, Catherine replied coolly. Besides, none of them know what Victoria Ashworth looks like. We simply won't mention that Alina works here. We'll introduce her as a pianist from the Philippines who studied in San Francisco. It's all true." Robert frowned. "And when word gets out, because it will get out, someone will recognize her. This could become a scandal." "Then it becomes a scandal," Catherine said with steel in her voice. "But at least I will have delivered the performance I promised. Alina, go with Margaret. You have 35 minutes to prepare. Can you do this?" Alina felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She thought about her mother, who had scraped together money for piano lessons when Alina was a child, believing in her daughter's talent. She thought about the dreams she had abandoned to save her family. She thought about all the years of silence and the unexpected gift of one more chance to make music. "Yes," she said, "I can do this." As Margaret led her toward the private quarters, Alina heard Patricia's voice drifting after them. "This is going to be a disaster. Mark my words, Catherine, you're going to regret this decision." In Catherine's luxurious bedroom suite, Margaret worked with swift efficiency to transform Alina from housekeeper to performer. She selected a deep blue evening gown that fit Alina surprisingly well, elegant, but not overly flashy. Another staff member was summoned to help with hair and makeup, working quickly to style Alina's graying hair into a sophisticated updo and apply cosmetics that enhanced rather than masked her natural features. As they worked, Margaret spoke softly. "I had no idea about your background, Alina. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Alina watched her transformation in the mirror, seeing a version of herself she had not seen in 3 decades. "What would have been the point? That life was over. I made my choices and I've lived with them. This job gave me stability when I needed it. I've been grateful for that." "But didn't you miss it? The music?" "Every single day," Alina admitted quietly. "But missing something and being able to have it are 2 different things. I learned to live with the missing." 20 minutes later, Alina stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The woman looking back was elegant and poised, someone who belonged in the world of crystal chandeliers and champagne rather than mops and cleaning supplies. But her eyes held the same quiet strength they always had, and her hands, despite the elegant dress, still bore the marks of hard work. Catherine appeared in the doorway, surveying the transformation with satisfaction. "Much better. Now listen carefully, Alina. You'll perform during the dinner service, background music while people eat. Then after dessert, we'll make a formal announcement and you'll do a featured performance of 3 or 4 pieces. Can you handle that?" "Yes, Mrs. Vandermeer." "One more thing," Catherine said, her voice dropping lower. "Patricia and Robert are right that people will eventually learn you work here. When that happens, there will be talk. Some people will mock you, some will question my judgment. Can you handle that as well?" Alina thought about the years she had spent being invisible, being dismissed, being treated as less than human by people who never bothered to learn her name. She had survived all of that. She could survive whatever came next. "I can handle it," she said firmly. Catherine nodded, a hint of respect appearing in her eyes. "Good, then let's go astonish some wealthy snobs who think they know everything." Alina walked beside Catherine through the marble corridors of the Belmont estate, her borrowed gown whispering against the polished floors. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they approached the ballroom, where the sounds of conversation and clinking silverware indicated that dinner service had begun. She could hear the string quartet that had been hired to provide background music during the meal, their pleasant but unremarkable performance filling the space adequately. As they reached the ballroom entrance, Catherine paused and turned to Alina with an expression that was surprisingly human beneath her usual aristocratic reserve. "I'm taking a significant risk on you tonight. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," Alina promised, though she wasn't entirely certain she could keep that promise. Catherine swept into the ballroom with her characteristic commanding presence, and Alina followed, trying to move with confidence despite feeling utterly exposed. The transformation in clothing and styling had given her an outer polish, but inside she felt like an imposter, a housekeeper playing dress-up in a world where she no longer belonged. The ballroom was breathtaking. 300 guests sat at elegantly appointed tables, the candlelight reflecting off fine china and crystal glassware. The air was rich with the scent of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and the gourmet meal being served by white-gloved waiters. These were people accustomed to the finest things in life, people whose standards were impossibly high and whose judgment could be cutting. Catherine guided Alina to the piano and spoke briefly to the string quartet, dismissing them with thanks for their service. Then she turned to address the room, raising her voice just enough to capture attention without seeming to strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying your meal. As many of you know, we had a small change in our evening's program. Victoria Ashworth unfortunately had to cancel due to a minor accident. However, we were fortunate to secure a wonderful replacement. Please enjoy your dinner accompanied by the artistry of Alina Rodriguez, a pianist from the Philippines who studied at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music." The introduction was truthful but carefully worded, omitting the crucial detail that Alina currently cleaned the very mansion they were dining in. A polite smattering of applause greeted the announcement, though Alina noticed that most guests barely looked up from their conversations and meals. She was meant to be pleasant background noise, nothing more. Alina sat at the piano and began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece beloved enough to be familiar but beautiful enough to showcase genuine skill. As her fingers found the notes, she felt the same miraculous transformation she had experienced during her earlier audition for Catherine. The music awakened something deep within her, and the years of silence melted away. She played for 45 minutes during the dinner service, moving through her repertoire with growing confidence. Chopin's Nocturnes, Sadie's Gymnopédies, Liszt's Liebestraum. Each piece flowed into the next, creating an elegant tapestry of sound that enhanced the dining experience without demanding focused attention. But Alina noticed something as she played. Gradually, conversations at the nearby tables began to quiet. People started turning in their seats to look at the piano. The music, intended as mere background, was commanding attention through its sheer quality and emotional depth. Even guests who had initially ignored her were now listening, their forks pausing midway to their mouths, their dinner companions forgotten. Among those watching with particular interest was a distinguished man in his late 60s seated at one of the premium tables near the front. His name was Jonathan Marcus, and he was a retired music critic who had spent 40 years reviewing performances for the Boston Globe. Jonathan had attended thousands of concerts in his career, heard countless pianists both famous and obscure, and prided himself on his discerning ear. Something about Alina's playing caught his attention immediately. There was a quality to her interpretation, a depth of feeling that transcended mere technical proficiency. He leaned over to his wife, a former opera singer, and whispered, "Who is this woman? I've never heard of her." His wife, Patricia Marcus, not to be confused with Patricia Thornton from the Foundation Board, shrugged. Catherine said she's from the Philippines, studied in San Francisco. Perhaps she performs mostly in Asia. Perhaps, Jonathan murmured, but his instincts told him there was more to this story. When the dinner service concluded and dessert was being cleared, Catherine returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed your meal and the wonderful piano accompaniment. Now, Miss Rodriguez will perform a featured program for us. Please give her your complete attention." The room settled into expectant silence. This was the moment when Alina would be truly judged, not as background entertainment, but as the evening's featured performer. She felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes upon her, and for a moment the old fear threatened to paralyze her. Then she thought about her mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier but who had never stopped believing that her daughter was meant to make music. She thought about every sacrifice she had made, every dream she had surrendered. This was not just a performance. This was a reclamation. Alina launched into Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece of staggering difficulty and dramatic intensity. It was a bold choice, the kind of selection that could either showcase brilliance or expose limitation. There was no middle ground with Rachmaninoff. Her hands attacked the keyboard with power and precision, drawing out the Prelude's famous opening chords with commanding authority. The music filled the ballroom like a force of nature, impossible to ignore or dismiss. This was not the gentle background playing of dinner service. This was a demonstration of serious artistry. The audience sat transfixed. Even those who knew nothing about classical music could recognize that they were witnessing something exceptional. Alina's years of hard physical labor, which had seemed like a liability, now served her well. Her hands were strong, capable of producing the thunderous fortissimos Rachmaninoff demanded while maintaining perfect control. When she finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic, far beyond the polite recognition typically given at such events. People actually stood, offering a standing ovation that surprised even Catherine. Alina continued with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that required not just technical skill but deep musical understanding. As she played, she was aware that she had crossed some invisible threshold. The skepticism in the room had evaporated. These people were no longer humoring a last-minute replacement. They were genuinely moved by what they were hearing. But not everyone in the room was pleased. Patricia Thornton sat at her table with Robert Hastings, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. The better Alina played, the more Patricia's initial judgment was revealed as wrong, and she did not like being proven wrong. "She's good," Robert admitted grudgingly. "Better than good, actually." Catherine's gamble paid off. "For now," Patricia said coldly, "but wait until people discover who she really is. Wait until word spreads that Catherine put the housekeeper on stage. Will be the laughingstock of every foundation on the East Coast." "Does it matter?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. "If she plays this well, who cares what she does for a living?" Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. It matters because we have standards. Because our donors expect a certain caliber of performer, and that caliber is not determined solely by skill, but by pedigree and reputation. This woman cleans toilets, Robert. How can we present her as a serious artist? At that moment, Patricia made a decision that would change the course of the evening. She pulled out her phone and sent a text message to several other board members and donors whom she knew would be sympathetic to her concerns. The message was simple but calculated to cause maximum disruption. Do you know that the pianist performing is actually the Vandermeer estate housekeeper? Catherine is passing her off as a professional musician. Thought you should know. The message spread through the room like wildfire, passed from phone to phone, table to table. Alina was midway through her final piece, Liszt's Un Sospiro, when she began to notice a shift in the atmosphere. People were checking their phones, whispering to their neighbors, casting speculative glances at her and then at Catherine. Alina finished the piece to another round of applause, but this time it was mixed with murmuring and uncertain glances. Something had changed, and she didn't understand what. Catherine certainly understood. She had seen the phones come out, noticed the whispers spreading, and her years of experience in high society told her exactly what was happening. Someone was spreading information meant to undermine Alina's performance and Catherine's credibility. As Alina stood to take her bow, Catherine quickly mounted the platform and took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that wonderful reception for Miss Rodriguez. I know some of you may have just learned that Alina has been employed by my household staff. I want to address that directly. The room went completely silent. Alina felt her stomach drop. This was the moment she had feared, when her dual identity would be exposed and she would be humiliated in front of 300 wealthy strangers. Catherine continued, her voice strong and unapologetic. Yes, Alina Rodriguez works as a housekeeper at the Belmont estate. She has done so for 7 years with dedication and professionalism. What many of you did not know until tonight, and what I myself only discovered a few hours ago, is that before she came to work for me, Alina was a concert pianist trained at one of America's finest conservatories. Life circumstances led her to set aside her musical career to support her family, a sacrifice that speaks to her character and values. Patricia Thornton rose from her seat, her voice cutting across the room. Catherine, this is highly inappropriate. We cannot have household staff performing at foundation events. It undermines the entire purpose of what we do here. And what exactly is our purpose, Patricia? Catherine shot back, her aristocratic composure giving way to genuine anger. I thought we were here to support the arts, to recognize and nurture talent wherever it appears. Or are we merely here to congratulate ourselves for appreciating music, while ensuring that only people from the right backgrounds are allowed to create it? The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Board members rarely confronted each other so directly in public, and Catherine's defense of Alina was unexpected and bold. Jonathan Marcus, the retired music critic, stood up from his table. May I say something? His reputation commanded respect, and the room quieted to hear him speak. I've spent my entire career evaluating pianists. I've heard performances at Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, and concert halls around the world. What I heard tonight was world-class artistry. I don't care if Miss Rodriguez cleans houses, drives a taxi, or works in a factory. That performance was magnificent, and anyone who can't appreciate it because of their snobbery about her day job is a fool. His words hung in the air, a challenge to everyone in the room to examine their own prejudices. The silence following Jonathan Marcus's declaration stretched for several heartbeats before the room erupted into competing reactions. Some guests broke into applause, supporting his assessment and Catherine's defense of Alina. Others sat stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation and uncertain how to respond. Patricia Thornton remained standing, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment at being publicly called out for her prejudice. Alina stood on the platform beside the piano, feeling utterly exposed. She had gone from invisible housekeeper to the center of a social controversy in the span of 2 hours, and the emotional whiplash was overwhelming. Part of her wanted to flee the ballroom and return to the safety of anonymity. But another part, the part that had just rediscovered the joy of making music after 3 decades of silence, refused to be ashamed. Robert Hastings, attempting to play peacemaker, stood and addressed the room. Perhaps we're all getting a bit overheated here. The bottom line is that we had excellent entertainment this evening despite difficult circumstances. Can't we simply appreciate that and move on? No, said a woman's voice from one of the center tables. I don't think we can simply move on. All eyes turned to the speaker, a striking woman in her 50s with silver hair styled in an elegant bob. Her name was Diana Chen, and she was one of the foundation's most generous donors, having contributed over $2 million in the past decade. She was also the CEO of a major technology company and someone whose opinion carried considerable weight. Diana walked toward the platform where Alina and Catherine stood, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. When she reached them, she looked directly at Alina with an expression that was impossible to read. "Miss Rodriguez," Diana said, "I would like to know why a pianist of your caliber has been cleaning houses for the past 7 years instead of performing." Alina felt her throat tighten. The question demanded vulnerability, required her to explain choices that still carried enormous pain. But she had come this far, and Diana's question seemed genuine rather than mocking. "My mother was dying of cancer in the Philippines," Alina said, her accented English clear but soft. "I was the oldest of 5 children. Someone had to work to send money home for treatment and to support my siblings. Piano performance, especially for a young artist with no reputation, pays almost nothing. I could not survive on it, much less support my family. So I found work that paid real wages. By the time my mother recovered and my siblings were grown, I had been away from music so long that going back seemed impossible. I built a different life. A smaller life perhaps, but a stable one." Diana nodded slowly, and to Alina's surprise, tears appeared in the older woman's eyes. "My father was a concert violinist in Taiwan, one of the finest of his generation," people said. "But when he came to America, no one would hire him because he had no American credentials, no connections. He ended up working in a restaurant kitchen for 30 years. He died never having performed professionally again. Do you know what that did to him? To watch his talent waste away while he washed dishes and chopped vegetables." The room had gone completely silent now, everyone straining to hear Diana's words. "My father's story is why I've always supported the arts," Diana continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Because I believe that talent and genius should not be wasted based on circumstances of birth or economic necessity. And yet here, in this room tonight, I've witnessed people ready to dismiss an extraordinary artist because she works as a housekeeper, as if manual labor somehow disqualifies her from having talent or worth." She turned to face the assembled guests. "How many of us in this room have benefited from luck, from being born into the right families, having access to the right schools, knowing the right people? How many of us have had our paths smoothed by privilege we did nothing to earn? And yet we sit in judgment of someone who sacrificed her dreams to save her mother's life, as if that sacrifice makes her lesser rather than greater." Patricia Thornton finally sat down, her earlier righteousness deflated by Diana's passionate words. Several other guests looked uncomfortable, forced to confront their own assumptions and prejudices. Jonathan Marcus spoke up again. "I would like to propose something. Miss Rodriguez, would you be willing to perform a full recital at Symphony Hall in Boston? I still have connections there, and I believe I could arrange it within the next few months." It's time the world heard what we've heard tonight. Alina felt dizzy with the speed at which her life was changing. A performance at Symphony Hall was the kind of opportunity that could launch a legitimate concert career. It was everything she had dreamed of as a young woman, the validation she had given up hope of ever receiving. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I would need time to prepare, to practice properly. I haven't performed seriously in 3 decades. "You have time," Jonathan assured her. "We'll schedule it for 6 months from now. That gives you half a year to prepare a program. And I suspect you'll find that muscle memory is a powerful thing. The music is still inside you. Tonight proved that." Catherine stepped forward, and to everyone's surprise, including Alina's, she placed a hand on Alina's shoulder. "Furthermore, I'm creating a new position at the foundation. Artist in residence. Alina, if you'll accept it, the job is yours. You'll teach music to underprivileged students, help us develop arts programming, and have time to prepare for performances. The salary will be comparable to what you make now, and you'll have access to our pianos for practice." Alina stared at Catherine in shock. The woman who had employed her as a housekeeper for 7 years, who had barely acknowledged her existence beyond approving her work performance, was now offering her a complete transformation of her life. "Why?" Alina asked simply. "Why would you do this for me?" Catherine's expression softened in a way Alina had never seen before. "Because Diana is right. I've benefited enormously from privileges I did nothing to earn. My husband's fortune, my social position, my access to culture and education, none of it came from my own merit. The least I can do is use those privileges to create opportunities for people who actually have earned them through talent and sacrifice." "You've earned this," Alina accepted. Alina felt tears streaming down her face, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I accept." The ballroom erupted in applause, genuine and enthusiastic this time, untainted by the earlier controversy. Even some of those who had initially been skeptical were clapping, moved by the dramatic turn of events and perhaps feeling somewhat ashamed of their earlier prejudices. But not everyone was celebrating. Patricia Thornton gathered her things and walked out of the ballroom, her rigid posture broadcasting her disapproval. A few others followed her, unable or unwilling to accept that someone from the serving class could be elevated to artist status. Robert Hastings remained, though he looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, many made a point of approaching Alina to congratulate her or share their own stories of family sacrifice and unfulfilled dreams. The barriers of class and status that typically define such events had been temporarily dissolved by the shared recognition of something authentic and moving. Diana Chen was among the last to leave. She pressed her business card into Alina's hand and said quietly, "My father would have loved to hear you play. Thank you for not letting your gift die completely, even though it must have been painful to keep it alive." After the guests had gone and the catering staff were clearing the tables, Alina sat alone at the piano, still wearing the borrowed evening gown, processing everything that had happened. Margaret found her there and sat down on the bench beside her. "I can't believe what just happened," Margaret said, shaking her head in wonder. "Your whole life just changed in one night." "I know," Alina replied, still dazed. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and discover it was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Margaret assured her. "Though I have to ask, how do you feel about it? This is all so sudden." Alina thought about the question carefully. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also more alive than I've felt in 30 years. I forgot what it felt like to be seen, to have people actually look at me and recognize that I'm more than just someone who cleans their homes. I forgot what it felt like to matter." "You always mattered," Margaret said gently. "But I understand what you mean. The world is finally seeing what was always there." In the weeks and months that followed, Alina's story spread far beyond the walls of the Belmont estate. Local news outlets picked it up, then national media. Housekeeper's hidden talent revealed at high society gala became a viral headline, capturing public imagination and sparking conversations about class, talent, and opportunity. The attention was sometimes overwhelming for Alina, who had spent so many years cultivating invisibility. But it also brought unexpected opportunities. Other venues besides Symphony Hall reached out to book performances. Music schools invited her to give master classes. Journalists wanted to interview her about her journey. True to her word, Catherine transformed Alina's employment situation. As artist-in-residence, Alina spent her days teaching piano to students from low-income families who showed musical promise. She found profound satisfaction in nurturing young talent, especially among immigrant children whose families had sacrificed to give them opportunities, just as her own family had done. She also practiced relentlessly, preparing for the Symphony Hall recital that Jonathan Marcus had arranged. Her hands, which had spent years wielding mops and scrub brushes, slowly regained the refinement and agility required for concert performance. The calluses didn't completely disappear, but she wore them with pride now, badges of honor representing her survival and resilience. The recital, when it finally took place, was sold out. The audience included classical music aficionados, curious members of the public who had followed her story, and several of her former housekeeping colleagues from the Belmont estate, whom Alina had insisted receive complimentary tickets. Catherine Vandermeer sat in the front row, and Diana Chen flew in from California to attend. Patricia Thornton did not attend, having resigned from the foundation board in protest of what she called the degradation of standards. Her resignation was not mourned. When Alina walked onto the Symphony Hall stage that evening, she felt the weight of every sacrifice, every year of silence, every moment of grief for the life she had lost. But she also felt the joy of redemption, the profound gift of a second chance. She sat at the piano and began to play, pouring 3 decades of lived experience into every note. The performance was not technically perfect. Decades away from serious practice had left their mark, and there were small imperfections that a more finely trained ear might catch. But what the performance lacked in polish, it made up for in emotional depth and authenticity. Alina played like someone who understood that music was not just about notes on a page, but about the expression of human experience in all its complexity. The standing ovation lasted for over 10 minutes. People wept openly, moved not just by the music but by the story it represented. A story of sacrifice and survival, of dreams deferred but not destroyed, of talent that refused to die even under the weight of poverty and necessity. In the years that followed, Alina built a modest but meaningful career as a performer and teacher. She never became world famous or wealthy from her music, but that had never been her goal. She had already achieved something far more valuable: the reclamation of her identity as an artist and the opportunity to share her gift with the world. She also became an advocate for working-class artists, speaking publicly about the systemic barriers that prevent talented people from pursuing careers in the arts. She established a scholarship fund for music students from low-income backgrounds, ensuring that others might not have to make the same impossible choices she had faced. When journalists asked Alina about that night at the Belmont estate, when she had been mocked and dismissed before silencing the room with her playing, she always gave the same response. "They didn't mock me because they were cruel people," she would say. "They mocked me because they couldn't imagine that someone like me, someone who cleaned their homes and served their meals, could also be an artist." We are taught to see people in narrow categories, to believe that manual laborers and musicians exist in separate worlds. That night, I had the chance to show them that those categories are false, that human beings contain multitudes, and that genius can be found in the most unexpected places if we simply have the wisdom to look. Her story became a reminder that every person we encounter carries hidden depths, untold stories, and unrealized potential. It challenged the comfortable assumptions of those who judge others based on occupation or social status. And it proved that it is never too late to reclaim the parts of ourselves we thought we had lost forever. The parts of ourselves we thought we had lost forever. Like, share, and subscribe, don't miss it.